To the extent that we live our lives in a manner that is consistent with the truth in our heart, we thrive.
Welcome to the Meier Clinics podcast, and you just heard a quote from one of your hosts, Dr. Lisa Day. Join our licensed clinical professionals from various backgrounds as they discuss fascinating mental health topics with a wide range of guests. Meier Clinics is a Christian counseling organization with multiple clinics nationwide dedicated to treating the whole person, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. Welcome to our listening family. We thank you for joining us.
Hi, everyone. This is Kristen Walker. We are here with Dr. Lisa Day. We're going to be talking about the Art of Grieving, and this is part of an upcoming book. Lisa, thank you so much for coming on the show.
You betcha. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Now, when is this book, or is that too much pressure? I know how book writing goes. So.
I'm pending the graduation of a 17-year-old.
Okay, so it's going to come after that.
Yes.
Gotcha. And that will have maybe, I don't know, will that have grief that you have to deal with? Because you.
Oh, definitely. It'd be a loss of a house full of kids. Yeah. But it's a book I'm really excited about, Kristen, because, in the 25 years that I've been a therapist, what I find is one of the most common things that comes in my office is the statement of, I can't believe. And that can be anything from, I can't believe I didn't get the job. I can't believe my boyfriend had an affair on me. I can't believe my dog was hit by a car. But whatever it is, it's the statement, I can't believe. And when that comes into the office or when that is presented in therapy, I find that that's prohibitive to moving into the coping process. And so when I put the Art of Grieving, A-R-T, it's really a 3-step process to help one move into integrating things that they're powerless over. It's a process that can be used from anything from not getting a job to really a complicated loss of a family member. And A stands for acceptance, R for responsible coping, and T for the teaching and learning opportunity inherent in the process. And what I find is when one comes in with a statement, I can't believe, what that does is trigger our stress response, which we all know is going to trigger the release of cortisol, which is going to cause the fight or flight hormone. When we come in fighting a reality, it complicates the coping process, it complicates grief. And so what I invite folks that I'm working with on the grieving process to do is to start with the word acceptance, meaning every time they find themselves saying, I can't believe, I can't believe, I can't believe, I challenge them to follow that up with, I accept. It may not be natural, a lot of it may be faking it till you make it, but when we say, I accept, it doesn't have that same stress response. So if you kind of say that phrase, I can't believe, versus I accept, neuro-linguistically, you're getting two different responses.
And how, when you say this to people, what's their reaction to that typically?
Well, typically they're not ready for it. No, I can't believe it. I don't want to believe it.
Right.
I don't want to deal with it. I don't want to have to deal with it. It can't be true. I'm not ready to be, to deal with it. And that is the case. Kubler-Ross talks about her 5 grieving processes of denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and ultimately acceptance. And that grieving process has been around for years, and it's phenomenally effective. But one of the things that I find is that there's a bit of a belief that we find ourselves in acceptance. And in the work that I've done, when I challenge folks to start with the word acceptance, it is going to move them out of fighting the reality and moving into coping more quickly. And so most folks don't feel accepted.
Yeah, exactly. And you're also moving your body out of that place where your body chemistry is going to respond to your disbelief. Like you just said, if you come at it from an acceptance place, you're actually, even if someone was resistant to saying accept instead of I can't believe, I guess you could say something like, well, you listen, it's healthier actually for you physically to go to there. Because your body is going to release stress chemicals because of even the language that you're using around this. Does that make sense, or am I off on that?
Absolutely. Because when our cortisol is not stimulated, we're not going to have the physiological responses of, increased blood pressure and decreased blood to the brain. Our body's, geared up to run from a cougar, if you will.
Right.
And so if our physiologically we're not experiencing that, we're more in a position to cope. But it's important for me also to say that when I challenge folks to start with the word acceptance, it's not at all to deny the full spectrum of emotions that they're experiencing. What's so important in the grieving process is out of the gate to respect every emotion, logical or illogical, making sense or not making sense. We want to respect the full spectrum of emotions that we experience related to the loss. The word acceptance is just to keep ourselves from stimulating cortisol, which complicates the grieving process. So we'll feel our full spectrum of emotions. The person will probably say, and I can't believe this is the case. However, I'm going to choose to accept. That part is faking till you make it out of the gate.
Yeah, and in this case, when we're dealing with grief about anything, especially deep, deep grief, like the loss of a person in your life or a pet, faking it until you make it is perfectly acceptable.
Well, and necessary for survival.
Yeah.
Because the pain can be, disabling, and that we are just getting through one day at a time. And so when I challenge folks, what I do is challenge them to pair it. Whenever you say, I can't believe, and I choose to accept. And over time, it's going to decrease the amount of fight and then enable us to move into coping. Just like in Kubler-Ross's process with the denial, the anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance, we move back and forth through them.
Right.
And the Art of Grieving, the ART, we move back and forth with them. But if we're not fighting a reality, we are going to be more equipped to be able to access healthy coping mechanisms. Some of the healthy coping mechanisms that I think are vitally important, start with our thought processes. I teach that which you think you become. Your thoughts create your reality.
Right.
And so if we're thinking this can't be so, I can't deal with this, there's no way I can get through this, that's going to further complicate the process.
Absolutely. So let's talk about the R in the Art of Grieving.
You betcha. And so, within the field of psychology, there's a plethora, if you will, of responsible coping mechanisms. But some of the ones, that are pertinent to the grieving process, as I mentioned, first and foremost, is guarding our mind. Guarding our mind from destructive thought, from self-accusing thought, from trying not to take it personally, trying not to make assumptions, believing that I deserve this, I did something wrong. Oftentimes in loss of a loved one, we want to blame ourselves.
Yes.
Kubler-Ross again talks about that whole bargaining stage of grieving. We want to blame ourselves. We want to blame others.
If I had only done this, if I had only made a different decision. Yeah, I've had people that have sat in there just obsessing. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, because obviously it's a stage, but that going over the event leading up to, or the events leading up to the loss, and trying to think of every possible way they could have handled it differently.
Well, absolutely. And it's important to remember that the coping mechanisms are not an effort to deny. We want to experience the full spectrum of emotions. So when one is in that bargaining phase of saying, I shoulda, coulda, woulda, if I would have answered the phone, or if I could have been there, if I would have told them one more time to please come over, then we follow it up with a coping mechanism of, however, I'm powerless over the fact that they were hit by a car, or I'm powerless over the fact that they took their life. And so the coping mechanisms are not to deny our feelings or our full spectrum of emotion. They're to be able to utilize in respecting the full spectrum of emotion. Meaning when we start blaming ourselves, we have to have a boundary with ourselves. So we're going to start by blaming ourselves of, I shouldn't have left him out in the yard. I knew he could get out of the gate. What was I thinking? Why did I put him in the yard? And then we come with a boundary. However, I'm powerless over the reality that he was hit by the car and he's gone. I have to accept the truth I have to accept the reality that it is what it is and I'm powerless over changing it. And likewise, another coping mechanism is boundaries with others.
Yeah, I was just
we
gonna
might say,
yeah, how do you deal with
Yeah.
people that come up and they also, because it's not just us in the grief that wants to say, how did this happen? How did I cause this? Other people do that to you, and come at you with, well, how did you let this happen? Or what were you doing that made that happen? And you're already in a pretty vulnerable state. So how do you tell people to handle those situations?
When someone comes up and blames them for a loss?
Yeah.
So if you're on the receiving end?
On the receiving end, yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good question. It would be a boundary, that I can't go there with you right now, or I'm not on board with that, or I'm not in agreement with that. So if you should have taken him to the vet, or you should have gone to the doctor sooner, it's that I need to embrace ultimately that I'm powerless over whatever the loss is. In the blame shifting, we look for something to explain it so we can feel better. We feel like if we can understand why it occurred, that it's going to make it less painful. But we can get stuck, in circles of blame shifting.
Right, exactly. Blame shifting. Some people call that victim blaming as well, I've heard.
Hi, this is Dr. Paul Meyer of the Meier Clinics. There's times in our lives when our situation may seem impossible to resolve. In fact, almost everyone who's depressed feels like there's no light at the end of the tunnel. But God promises that there is nothing that's too hard for Him. When you're discouraged, remember that God loves you, He knows you by name, and our Christian counselors of the Meier Clinics will also come beside you, speaking the truth in love. We offer biblically based counseling.
The Meier Clinics, a nonprofit counseling ministry of the Meier Clinic Foundation. For more information, 1-888-7-CLINIC.
Absolutely. Well, and if with the responsible coping, it's not, at all to, the goal isn't to not feel, the goal is to be able to have a means to cope. And in the grieving process, back in the day of cognitive behavioral therapy, there was an implication that it would take 6 to 8 weeks. And we all know that it's not. In fact, the definition that I like the best, or I find to be the most effective with grieving, is the ability to integrate profound sadness and integrate, and that we don't get over, we don't get past, we don't move on, time doesn't heal, but we come to a place where we're able to integrate that loss into our life, that profound sadness.
Oh, that's beautiful. And it's so interesting. One of the things that I've so enjoyed for the past year is having Dr. Paul Meyer, who of course is one of the founders of Meier Clinics, and having him come on my show every week, and we talk about everything. And one of the things he's said in relation to what you were just talking about is that when people come into one of the Meier Clinics and go through something like the Catalyst program, which is a program that many of the Meier Clinics do around the country, that people there, the clinicians and the rest of the staff that are there, feel like they really haven't done their job well if someone hasn't cried on the first day that they're there.
Hasn't cried.
Yes, because they want you to get to that, what you're talking about, that profound sadness. And
profound sadness.
Yeah.
And when is grieving complete? I think that grieving is an ongoing process. And so if you talk about integrating that profound sadness, when we have coping mechanisms in place, when something triggers or provokes or reminds or brings up that pain again, we have the ability to experience, again, that full spectrum of pain, utilize coping mechanisms, and know that we are in a lifelong process with many losses of integrating that sadness. A complicated grief such as suicide isn't something that we ever get over. Loss of a parent isn't something that we ever get over. Loss of a child. But we do have the ability with healthy coping mechanisms to navigate this life in a way that it's not going to disable us, that we're able to find a new norm, that we're able to have new life experiences.
This is so much healthier than what's been in the past, which is people sort of having a step ladder of stages where, oh, yep, I went through the angry stage, or, oh, yep, I'm done with this stage. Like everything's on this timeline, and you're measuring your health, your mental health, your well-being, your grief based on these stages that you have to get across that finish line. This is so much healthier to me. It feels like that, to say, I take this with me. It's always here. It's just how I've integrated it and how much it is affecting my day. The time of minutes each day or hours or whatever get less and less and less over time. And that's where time is a healer. But it's not that, time is the healer. It's time is used as a measurement to see how long am I processing this information? Is it getting shorter and shorter, but still a part of me? There's my measurement. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And how well we're integrating it. So you can take two people in the same family who have experienced a very complicated loss, let's say a suicide. And if one person is engaged in the art of grieving and they're engaged in acceptance and choosing healthy coping mechanisms, they are going to integrate it in, say, 2 years in a fashion much differently than someone who's choosing not to cope, who cannot accept, who chooses simply to say, I do not accept that that family member has taken their life and I'm not going to talk or deal with it ever again. That person is going to be in a very different place 2 years later.
Right.
And the other part, we talk about acceptance and we talk about ongoing responsible coping, but it's, in my opinion, that the T of the art of grieving, the teaching and learning opportunity, which none of us want to think, oh, what's the teaching and learning opportunity in this profound loss? None of us want to look for that. But if we engage in the process, it does emerge. And Kristen, it's my belief that the number one human growth challenge that has faced us, and none of us say, ooh, pick me, I like this challenge.
Exactly.
is that of embracing powerlessness. Truly, it's one of those dynamics that I believe is beaten out of us.
Yes.
Beaten out of us through magnificent pain and loss.
Oh, yes. And I was just, when you said that, I was picturing all the students that rush to be at the front of the classroom, to be the one that's picked, and they're right there. And when you're talking about this kind of thing, everybody's in the back of the classroom. Yeah.
Well, and it's interesting because as you navigate through the grieving process and you navigate with healthy coping, really where you find yourself coming again and again and again and again is the realization that at the end of the day, through accepting that loss, you are completely powerless over changing it. At the end of the day, there's nothing that you can do to bring back that parent who passed, or that pet that you lost, or that job that you were fired from. It is what it is. And what I find is when people come in fighting, I can't believe, it hardens the heart. It creates a bitterness. It creates a resentment, which in my opinion, interferes with our ability to have compassion, to have empathy, to be able to have greater room for love. Whereas when we come to that why in the road and we say, do I have influence here or am I powerless? The quicker our ability to determine where we are powerless gives us the freedom to invest our emotional resources where we do have power. So when a friend or a family member has a loss, when we are able to acknowledge that we are powerless over that loss, we have greater space and freedom in our heart to love on them, to support them, to encourage them, and to be there for them. But if we are then joining them in fighting something that we're powerless over, we're inhibiting that whole process.
Absolutely.
And so in grieving, if we think, I have to accept that it is what it is, I'm powerless over changing it, I need to cope with it in a responsible fashion, ultimately reinforcing that teaching that I am powerless, that whole process is a practice that enables us to integrate profound losses. But while that process absolutely is effective in profound losses, the beautiful thing about it is we can use it on disappointments, daily losses. An example, when your car breaks down and you're on your way to work and you think, I cannot believe this. Why would this happen to me? I have been an idiot for not getting my car maintained, or my spouse is an idiot for not getting my car maintained. All of that just stimulates cortisol, interfering with us being able to cope. Whereas if we say, wow, car's dead. The truth, in fact, is it's not going anywhere. How can I cope with this? What do I need to do? I need to walk 2 blocks to work. I need to call AAA. I need to be thankful that it happened at the post office and not in the middle of the freeway.
Right.
And I need to focus on what's ahead of me. So the art of grieving absolutely is can be used in major losses, but it can be used on a daily basis with car errors or disappointments, letdowns, not having snow on a ski vacation, or raining when you're in the Bahamas.
Or taking a walk with your dog and you forgot to bring the doggy bags, and there you are in front of the neighbor 5 miles from your house going, sorry, oh boy. Yeah, that too.
Well, but in that example, Kristen, that's a great example, because rather than trying to hide it or protect no one seeing that your dog's
I keep looking away like I don't see it happening, so it's not happening.
You say, I accept the fact, and you turn to your neighbor and you say, you know what? I walked out without a doggy bag, right? Chance do you have a doggy bag that I might remove the poop? And then, lo and behold, you've made a new friend.
Exactly.
Yeah, you've made a new friend.
Exactly. It's that connection. I'm telling you, that connection with people. There's more incidents where, you are, let's say your alternator is blown in your car, and you can choose to be angry and upset and so on, or you can choose to handle it differently. And I tend to, my natural resting state now is to just try to be the nicest person that the tow truck driver has ever had to deal with or had to deal with that day. And usually something amazing comes out of it. So I end up making a new friend out of this experience, instead of being grumpy with him or her because my car.
Making a new friend, getting a few new words of wisdom. Mm-hmm. And then the other piece is that when we fight a reality and we stimulate that stress response, the downfall of chronically elevated level cortisol is huge. It's associated with the development of type 2 diabetes. It's associated with obesity. It's associated with fertility problems. So if we can cope with the daily stressors, which require grieving, letting go, embracing our powerlessness, health-wise, we're going to benefit by not having the negative side effects of chronically elevated stress levels as a result of the cortisol, as a result of the phrase, I can't believe.
Right. Absolutely. Well, Dr. Lisa Day, thank you so much for coming on and talking about the Art of Grieving. I can't wait for the book to come out, but no pressure. It'll come out when it comes out. But again,
and I'll be grieving an empty nest.
That's right. You'll be grieving and going, I'm glad I wrote this book. Yeah. I don't want to.
I can implement it.
Exactly. Well, I want to say also thank you to our listeners. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.
We hope you enjoyed this podcast. Tune in next time for another engaging discussion on relevant mental health topics. If you have any questions about Meier Clinics, please visit our website at meierclinics.com. That's MEIER clinics.com, or call us at 888-7-CLINIC. Don't forget to leave us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, or any of your favorite podcast apps. And please note that we are a member of and produced by Mental Health News Radio Network, MHNRnetwork.com.